Welcome to the Trump Breaking News Network, your daily source for up-to-the-minute Trump news. Join us today and every day. Here's today's news.
This is TBNN.
Wiretapping Trump Tower, two spy hunters explain exactly how Deep State did it. Plus, a short history of the creation of the national security state. How they built the spying and surveillance architecture for a global espionage network. TMR editor's note. The exposé posted below is quite extraordinary for the depth and breadth of research into the clandestine architecture of national security state. The two authors have not only revealed the secret history of the global spying and surveillance regime, they have also examined the nuts and bolts of this patently unlawful worldwide operation. For those who are uninitiated in this realm, TMR also recommends the following in-depth reports on similar topics. Unless the mission of DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is properly understood, it's impossible to comprehend the true level of microsurveillance that occurs on every IT device in the world, 24/7. For those who really want to or need to know exactly how their every keystroke is being monitored, the link below contains disclosures that do not appear anywhere else on the internet. DARPA Vader and the evil intel empire inside. Lastly, there is now a rapidly growing body of evidence concerning CIA criminality that is being assembled by out media investigative reporters and citizen journalists, which is quite compelling. This compendium of deep state malfeasance is just one example, the CIA and deep state conspiracy finally exposed. The Millennium Report. July 17, 2017. And what follows is the TSCM experts' report on wiretapping Trump Tower, and every other office building in the world. Even after reading this highly authoritative account, it's clear that we the people don't even know what we don't know about this all-pervasive spying and surveillance regime. TSCM equals Technical Surveillance Countermeasures. Title: Tapping President Trump's Wires, A Spy Hunter's Perspective. Authors: James M. Atkinson and Stan Spring. Publication date: March 17, 2017. Synopsis: Our modern-day lives are brief, very intense flashes of light, circling the world on ultra-pure puffs of smoke, and our government craves to capture all those flashes of lights. Introduction. On March 4, 2017, President Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, penned the following tweet, March 4 early Saturday morning. While away at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, Trump fired off his first tweet accusing Obama of wiretapping his phones at Trump Tower in New York during the election. That Twitter message has spawned a daily furor of sound bites in the news media describing in great detail the denials, spins, double talk, within the ambit of congressional concern. Although when John Le Carre chose to use the word circus to describe the highest echelon of Britain's MI6, its secret intelligence service, it is doubtful that he envisioned the acute relevance circus has today to describe the Alice in Wonderland drama being presented in the media regarding President Trump's tweet. The far more cogent, sinister and impacting story is not the circus drama between President Trump and his detractors. It is the fact that there is no doubt that routine clear intercepts and eavesdropping has and is continuing without a peep from any of the nationally recognized news agencies reminiscent of Rome's bread and circus days. Detailed below is a detailed account of routine spy intercept programs which are designated as legal, in which Trump Tower, like millions of others, were indeed intercepted. In the spirit of this looking-glass wonderland, ongoing saga, let one say that wiretapping conveys the general idea of what has and is happening. However, as the sophists hone their skills in denials and articulations of denial, it should be said communications these days are not carried over wires but fiber optic cables. No doubt there will be a panoply of intelligence and congressional pundits pouncing on the distinction to prove that Trump is wrong. In fact, Trump is right. Here's why. Modern technological marvels. 1. Modern communications systems consist of three elements or functional subsystems. The first is the call-to-subscriber device, which converts speech or audio signals and video images, analog data, into a carefully standardized stream of data, whereby things like sound, photographs, and moving images are converted into their digital equivalents. An example is a traditional residential telephone or cable television box. The second subsystem is called a transmission system, which includes a method to take the carefully standardized stream of data that represents analog things and send it to a shared interconnection point. This interconnection point is called a switching system. For each quantity of transmission systems, a different switching system is required. These switching systems are interconnected to other switching systems by means of interconnected transmission systems to form a global switching system. Digital devices, like modern computers, video cameras, 4K televisions, cellular telephone, tablets and other technological marvels, connect to the Internet. Typically, these devices' signals originate digitally. The originating device is known as the subscriber's device. Because modern communications systems, such as cable TV systems, cellular systems, and the Internet requires very rigid protocols or technical etiquette. These protocols allow manipulation of the system so that they perform as intended and without interruption. Customers or end users are generally unaware that the protocols ensuring digital quality reception are equally capable of spying on them. In bygone years, Ma Bell installed 2 copper wires into a family's home for the telephone. These 2 copper phone wires traveled from the home into a shared cable outside on the telephone pole. As these outside cables got closer to the switching center, the cables got thicker and bigger, incorporating huge numbers of other telephone wires. By the time these final cables reached Ma Bell's switching center, they were as thick as a person's wrist and often included over 600 telephone lines. This method of phone service cabling had some serious setbacks. When the cables were more than a few miles away from the switching center, phone company engineers encountered problems with reliability and consistent service quality. These massive cables became highly vulnerable to wiretapping. Often, the switching station servicing these cables required several acres of equipment. Massive concentrated access. With the advent of modern communications, the phone company began a new process called multiplexing. Multiplexing blended customers' phone signals together with other customers' signals, thereby providing much greater number of phone numbers on existing cables. Rather than continue costly, massive cables, Ma Bell opted to install these multiplexers on the already existing phone architecture. The use of multiplexing was virtually invisible to the customer both when they were first used, and still to the modern day. The next advance came with fiber optic cables. Initially, fiber optics were used by Ma Bell to interconnect their switching facilities in the U.S. as well as foreign switching stations connected by undersea cables across the oceans. With the explosive consumer growth of the Internet and cell phones, fiber optic transmission systems are the preferred connection. Presently, the U.S. is interlaced with millions of miles of fiber optic cabling. Today's fiber optic systems use multiplexers, just like the old, copper cable systems did before the rise of fiber. Modern fiber optic multiplexers reach thousands of miles, rather than copper system multiplexers that reached only a few miles. Modern fiber enables the multiplexing of millions of customers on a single fiber the size of a human hair. Despite the small size, fiber renders astounding reliability and accuracy. Initially, fiber optic multiplexers required considerable human intervention to maintain the system. With technical advances, these fiber systems were programmed to maintain themselves with super quality and efficiency. While fiber optic multiplexing systems deliver high-quality, efficient communications, they contain inherent vulnerabilities and serious weaknesses that can be equally exploited as a superb, massive-scale surveillance system. The fly in the ointment. The most glaring vulnerability can be exploited with physical access to the multiplexer. With physical access to the multiplexer, tens of thousands of phones and computers can be invaded. By gaining physical access to the multiplexer, the software that runs the multiplexers can be hacked so all communications can be received at listening posts in Cunha, Hawaii or Lackland, Texas, for example. So where are these multiplexers? Multiplexers are everywhere. It's no secret that the occupants of Trump Tower, like many luxury high-rise buildings in New York City, have multiplexers to operate their fiber optic systems. The Daily News is rife with allegations and denials of the eavesdropping of Trump Tower and President Trump during the 2016 campaign. Because Trump Towers is no different than other high-rise buildings in New York City when it comes to communications, that is, there are multiplexers, all of the computers and phone lines in. 3. Trump Tower could have been compromised intact, compromised without zero oversight. The invasion of these multiplexers is far more insidious than any eavesdropping performed during the days of copper wiring. Not only can all communications be intercepted, harmless desktop phones, computer cameras, cell phones, tablets and televisions can be remotely activated for full audio and video surveillance of a person's every moment. The microphones in the desktop phones, cell phones, computers, laptops, tablets and televisions can be activated even when these devices are off. Adding another twist to this murder mystery about who killed the victim, privacy, a modern eavesdropper with access to the multiplexer and its software, can direct the multiplexer to direct all data, including the remotely retrieved video and audio from a person's computers, phones, tablets, etc., to dozens or hundreds of artificially created pathways leading to listening posts anywhere in the world. Freedom from detection, usually. No eavesdropper likes to get caught. One problem with penetrating multiplexers and their software is that it is not complexly difficult to track additional fiber optic cables attached to a target system. By merely manipulating the multiplexer and its software, a skilled eavesdropper can ensure his or her freedom from capture. This does not mean the eavesdropper is bulletproof. It does mean that it takes a highly skilled, well-equipped spy hunter to catch the eavesdropper. Access by default, a key to help the eavesdroppers. There are millions of AT&T/Lucent, Cognizant, Optisphere, Fujitsu and other fiber products in use throughout the United States. Believe it or not, factory default accounts and the default passwords are present in many systems even decades after their initial installation. In less than a minute of physical access to these multiplexers, multiple backdoors can be injected into the system for further, future use. Most remarkably, most multiplexers are installed in a locked, steel cabinet. Typically, these cabinets, however, literally have no back whatsoever. Others, while locked, often have the key hanging next to the secure multiplexer, or the key is actually in the lock. Ironically, it is the exception, and not the norm, to find that the keys and passwords to multiplexers are not written on the lock box with keys hanging next to the box. Buildings in New York City, Boston, Chicago, Atlanta and other major cities across the U.S. are no exception to the norm. 4. Flexible restrictions on the government. The Constitution of the United States provides that no government entity or government employee, including law enforcement, is allowed to eavesdrop on any U.S. citizen without a court order. Despite this guarantee, court orders are routinely obtained with hyperbolized, sworn true facts in which police either lie or distort the truth in order to fraudulently obtain the warrant. Extremely careful examination of warrants, and the affidavits used by government officials to obtain them often reveals organized deceptions that are routinely used, and which gravely offend the Constitution of the United States. Political eavesdropping has been around since the invention of the telephone and telegraph, and little has changed, but the technology. In politics, it is normal, and even common for a Watergate style of situation to take place, where one political party bugs the other political party, or the support team for one candidate bugs the candidate of the other party. It is a dirty business, but very commonplace, and very old tradition. Reigning in the government and breaches of constitutional law. On March 4, 1789, the Bill of Rights consisting of the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution became the rule of law for these United States. Of particular import is the Fourth Amendment, which read, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized." On June 19, 1968, under the presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson, Congress enacted the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. Although the act is, more often than not, remembered for establishing the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, LEAA, it also enacted sweeping restrictions and criminal penalties for the possession and use of devices designed primarily for the surreptitious interception of wire and/or wire communications. Title III also criminalized mere possession of bugging devices and associated wiretapping and eavesdropping. Ironically, Title III, as it is generally referred to in law enforcement circles, was enacted because of congressional concerns about abuses by law enforcement in electronic surveillance. This legislative concern is expressed in the Congressional Record of Same. 5. In 1974, Congress conducted an overview by establishing the National Commission for the Review of Federal and State Laws relating to wiretapping and electronic surveillance. A 22-volume bound record of these proceedings was confected with a single-volume report issued in 1976. Despite the Fourth Amendment and Title III restrictions, later issuance of presidential executive orders, many cloaked under national security, coupled with a series of clever manipulations by intelligence agencies has resulted in wholesale eavesdropping for decades. Of course, a whole new dicta has arisen to thwart these guaranteed rights of Americans. For example, NSA maintains that its wholesale storage of every email, text message, phone call, fax, and other communications is not an intercept. Only when data is retrieved and viewed does an intercept occur. As one will see, this news topic is nothing more than bread and circus drama for the masses. The term special relationship, often associated with the relationship between the United States and Great Britain, will take on a much deeper meaning within the daily operations of the United States, United Kingdom, British, Canadian, Australia, and New Zealand intelligence agencies. This special relationship runs much deeper within the intelligence cabal of Lacar's circus in Cambridge. With the use of this special relationship, the Canadian, United Kingdom, and United States countries with the rule of law, routinely sidestep constitutional protections daily for a multitude of reasons, which include political spying and political repression. Special top secret is a wiretapping. The United States government has a special relationship and written contract with every single company that provides undersea, fiber optic communications entering or exiting the United States. Under these contracts, the U.S. government is provided with unrestricted backdoors to every single fiber optic cable entering or leaving the U.S. There is even a special classification for any connection between the U.S. government and specifically named companies who provide access to their fiber cables inside these companies' transmission and/or switching systems. These access points are usually right at the multiplexers inside the communication company buildings. The special relationship bears the classification ESA, which stands for Exceptionally Controlled Information. This ESA designation means that the specific phone company or fiber optic operator has actually informally granted the U.S. government access to the most vulnerable portions of its communications system. This access occurs with virtually no oversight or supervision. Through ESA, the U.S. government collects everything, missing nothing. These collected communications can be exploited months or years later. Without any supervision or oversight, one wonders who regulates the regulators? To avoid any accusations of abuse, these government 6. entities exploit their special relationships by using what is called the New York reach around. To achieve complete access and exploit the New York reach around, an interesting relationship has evolved between the government and fiber optic operators. In order for any fiber optic cable to enter or leave the United States, the operator is required to obtain a special license from the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. This procedure is maintained through a special national security department of the FCC called the International Bureau. The International Bureau, as a condition precedent to licensing, requires the cable operators to contract with the U.S. government, allowing full and complete access to the contents of each and every cable. By virtue of this agreement, any requirements for warrants or court orders are eviscerated. By virtue of these agreements, no oversight or supervision is required. These undersea cable operators and the U.S. government of course do not advertise any of this. Fairview Longline's Titan Pointy skyscraper. For example, the U.S. government has a series of contracts with AT&T in which AT&T agrees to permit the federal government unsupervised access to all customer communications that passed over its undersea cables, domestic transmission facilities, and domestic switching systems. In these documents AT&T is given a special code name. Each of its facilities where this sort of eavesdropping takes place is given different code names. For example, there are several major access points that are on domestic soil which AT&T, Fairview, has given the NSA access to, which use location code names such as Killington, Copper Mountain Maverick, Whistler, Sun Valley, Cliffside, Tahoe, Breckenridge, Eagle, Eden, Titan Pointy, 33 Thomas Street, Pinecone, Silverculm and others. It does bear mentioning that when an NSA relationship is established that in various documents the company itself will be given one code name, then the overall project an umbrella name, then under the umbrella each portion will be given a code name, and then each location or sublocation, yet a different name, and tremendous care is taken to isolate the names so there is little reference to one another. To take this one more step, the AT&T Longlines building at 33 Thomas Street, code-named Titan Pointy, is operated by AT&T under a code name of Lithium, with Rimrock access, a code name for a hack into the 4ESS switching system, and also to the code name Rimrock program by way of the satellite dishes on the roof. Thus, by way of the cable vault in the third basement virtually anything in New York. 7. City can be tapped or tracked, and vast swathes of the inside of this building, as well as access to fiber optic systems are rented to the NSA, and even to the FBI. The Titan Pointy is fed data from the Pinecone facility, which provides control and access to the shared fiber optic backboard, and the proprietary cables. This collected data is then funneled into the corporate networks of AT&T Blarney Local Area Network, High Decibel, and then into the corporate AT&T network to the codename Pinwhale, Ragtime, servers which harvest based on dictionary tasked terms. But, all of the aforementioned networks, access points, and hard drives all fall under the umbrella of codename Fairview. AT&T or Verizon controls the fiber optic or copper cables when they enter the cable subterranean vault, and AT&T operated the initial router or multiplexer that handled the cable fiber that enters the building. Then AT&T runs the Pinecone SIF inside Titan Pointy, which they hand off to another router, multiplexer in a co-location interconnection point, and hand off the data from AT&T at that point over to the NSA under an interface called Wealthy-Custer, and NSA machine, the first NSA machine in the stream, which stitches together bits and bytes to reconstruct the intercepted data, which is then forwarded to another NSA-owned and operated system called mail order, which then sends the data to an AT&T gateway between mail order and Blarney, and then to NSA leased lines to the NSA server called Pinwhale, Ragtime. The aforementioned method is used to collect general Internet activities such as email and web browsing. In order to capture voice, fax, or modem traffic via Titan Point, things are a bit more complicated, so they will be explained at this point. The routers inside the Pinecone facility at Titan Point need to process VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, in a different manner, so the AT&T mail order router connects to VoIP traffic though code-named Sagard by way of the Turnstile gateway. VoIP collection is fairly simple to harvest and then channeled to the NSA, but fax and modem calls are a little more complicated. AT&T Rimrock access, at Titan Pointy, provides access to the fax and modem traffic, though codename NSA loopers, which feeds voice signals directly to the NSA mail order router, as above, but data and fax is processed through codename Tinsel/Stonegate before it goes to the NSA mail order server for the Blarney program at AT&T at the Titan Pointy skyscraper. Then AT&T router splits off the metadata into a separate long-term storage mechanism for use outside the NSA, but both the metadata and the actual call itself is copied to the NSA Fairview mail order gateway to the NSA Blarney mail order router and then the corporate mail order, and then split into one of two paths either through conveyance or fishway to be stored in the NSA-controlled Nucleon or Pinwheel servers. These functions then pass to Cisco routers, multiplexer, and then to a fiber optics ONET network to interconnect 15+ related eavesdropping nodes: Birchwood, Maytag, Eagle, Eden, Titan Pointy, Substratum, Sportcoat, Queensland, Scallion, Quarter Pounder, Doghit, Homemaker, Apple One, Clever Device, et al. Titan Pointy is also the primary hub for eavesdropping on the United Nations headquarters, every foreign embassy in New York or surrounding area, the homes 8 of every foreign diplomat, and even the homes and offices of every lowly employee of every single embassy or diplomatic mission in the area. There is even 2 other backup sites in New York City which will take over eavesdropping on these targets should Titan Pointy go offline, plus a half-dozen tertiary locations outside of the NYC area. The FBI and NSA actually lease 4 floors of this building, Titan Pointy, as part of the Blarney program. And to get into one of these 4-floor, a visitor must possess a top-secret clearance and having been read into the ISA program for AT&T, Sprint, SCI, and other companies who are eavesdropped upon via this facility. This is not even close to the full extent of the eavesdropping, as AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, et al. also operates over 50 similar intercept locations around the country, so that nothing escapes the eavesdropping machine run by the NSA. Cool spy hunting method. Amusingly, the NSA even has reserved parking at Titan Pointy, so that the undercover FBI vehicles driven from Maryland can park right in front of the building, along with their windshield-mounted FBI-issued speed pass that can be used to track their every movement. It is always wise to understand that there are spy hunters, who track the spies, no matter whom the spy is or whom they work for, and it is very easy to interrogate a speed pass, as pass module, and then track all those vehicle movements, and then in turn the movements of any cell phone in the vehicles, and then to track those same phones to NSA employees' offices, homes, and so on. This of course can lead to the leasing company used for the cover vehicles, and then in turn to every undercover vehicles, and so on, as the leasing company has installed tracking devices into all of their vehicles, so that the spy hunter can merely acquire the GPS logs of these vehicles, and geofence the Titan Point and related locations, and watch the watchers, even when they visit Guam. Thereafter, AT&T will only be referred to directly in the initial contracts and papers used to set up the code names. The assigned, new code names are then used outside the initial setup contract. Despite these maneuvers, highly skilled, trained and creative intelligence analysis can, through open-source research, locate each and every one of these undersea cables, their locations, and incoming, outgoing points where the cables contact the company's multiplexers exploited by the U.S. government. Because the Canadian and British governments have similar arrangements with cable operators in their countries, they mirror all the data the NSA collects, while NSA mirrors the same data the UK's GCHQ-A/K/A government communications headquarters collects. This mirroring effect has evolved into a convenient, cozy special relationship bearing its progeny known as a New York reach around. Of course the United States also has a cozy, and very special relationship with the Canadian government agency responsible for handling wide-scale eavesdropping, the Communications Security Establishment, CSE, and all 3 agencies shared responsibilities and resources between each other. 9. When the President needs illegal eavesdropping to be performed that would clearly violate the Constitution of the United States, a requires will be made to the British or Canadian government under the guise of a terrorism case, and one or both of those governments will target the wires in the United States. Of course Australian Defence Signals Directorate, DSD, and New Zealand, Government Communications Security Bureau, GCSB, also have an equally special relationship, so there ends up being 5 different countries that have access into the fiber optic systems of the other countries, and who can and will have access things that were off limits to the primary company, and which will be unlawfully collected, and shared for political gain, and there's a special name called Five Eyes or Spoke where all five of these nations spy on not merely the rest of the world, but also on each other of internal political controls. The New York Reach Around. When a spy hunter is deploying her special skills and equipment, it is not uncommon to find a skyscraper on Park Avenue in New York City with a comprehensive, state-of-the-art, and fiber-optic communication system. This system's optical fibers initially pass to Pearl Street, Hudson, 8th Avenue or Broad Street or any of a dozen other similar, interconnected communications facilities in New York City. From one of those locations, the skyscraper's communications bounce over to one of the numerous undersea cable stations located on Long Island or in New Jersey. From one of these points, the communications are delivered by undersea cable to England or Canada. When the communications are received in England, they then return to the United States to the phone company on Broad Street or Pearl Street after passing through a GCHQ beam splitter, and then an NSA-controlled beam splitter. This communications delivery is, in spy hunting jargon, called the New York Reach Around. The signals from the skyscraper on Park Avenue may actually be routed to Canada and England, via East Coast fibers, but it may also end up getting routed through Australia and New Zealand systems, and re-enter the United States on the West Coast, and pass across the country to return to New York City, just so all five nations get access to some business executive calling in a pizza order to the restaurant down the street from his office. During his presidential campaign, there is an overriding reason the U.S. government pays a premium for this delivery system and uses it as much as it can. First, the various congressional committees that is supposed to supervise, do not. Second, communications desired to be intercepted against U.S. citizens physically inside the United States can legitimately be received by the NSA or other intelligence agencies from their counterparts in the UK, Canada and elsewhere. It is a noteworthy, albeit troubling aspect of the international fiber optic landing stations in the United States, that every bit of data, every second of every phone call, 10. and every frame of every video conference in Manhattan can be funneled out of the United States through the undersea cables in Mastic Beach, Far Rockaway, Crab Meadow, Manhattan Beach, or Long Beach, New York and sent to England. Once received legitimately in England by its GCHQ, the same data, phone call, video conference can then be relayed back to the United States to be intercepted by the NSA. To add icing on the cake, GCHQ and MI5, MI6 then prepare an analysis of what they saw on their side of the fiber for the NSA, while the NSA and CIA prepare an analysis for GCHQ of what was seen on this end. These special relationship partners exchange reports, and crisscross each other's reports for whatever purpose they desire, including political gain on both sides of the Atlantic. Similar arrangements exist with Canada, Australia, New Zealand and other countries. It does bear mentioning that a skilled technical surveillance countermeasures, TSCM, specialist can detect this sort of manipulation and can do so covertly. The Five Eyes Reach Around in action. To compound these special relationships, even private, leased fiber optic lines, which are only supposed to travel a few miles to the multiplexers they use, can be exploited using the New York Reach Around. These same, short-run signals can be sent around the world, allowing each, receiving nation to obtain private information and communications of U.S. citizens. Of course, the U.S. has no mechanism to prevent abuses by those foreign nations. Cynics might suggest such abuses by these foreign governments inures to the benefit of the U.S. government, all without any oversight. Let one suppose, for example, there is an electronics engineer by the name of Mr. Atkinson, 1A, U.S. citizen, lives in the Boston area. He wishes to call a business customer in Manhattan, who is also a U.S. citizen. The conversation involves the design of a telemetry encryption module for use in military drone aircraft operated by the United States and used for military strikes in foreign lands. Both Atkinson in Boston and the Manhattan business customer are electronics engineers for equipment of this type. Both have done these sorts of design projects together in the past. Presently, The U.S. government uses modules on the Predator and Global Hawk drone aircraft engineered by these conversants. The designs are not classified or restricted, although the designs have tremendous competitive and strategic value. To ensure their own security and privacy, both parties use a high-performance encryption system that exceeds all current military specifications. As a result of the profession's work history and the fact they design military weapons systems, these conversants are of interest to intelligence agencies across the globe. In the normal course of call routing, the communications between the two have to get routed from Boston to Canada, then to England. From England the conversations 11. Are sent to Mastic Beach Untersea Landing Station, then to Broad Street in NYC, and then to the Park Avenue skyscraper, and back again. By this means, the governments of Canada and England have full access to these private, U.S. citizen communications. Simultaneously, the U.S. government gains mirror access since the communications crossed international borders. The various intelligence agencies of all these three nations now are aware, if previously unknown, of these U.S. citizen parties. The result is that their future communications to or from anybody are given extra special attention. Interestingly, once any encryption is detected on communications, voice or data, the priority value for intercept increases and the targeting of past and future conversations goes up. These parties' future communications become targeted as intercepts of high value. When intelligence services realize the existence of non-standardized encryption is being used, these services go into a frenzied mode to quickly try to adjust their analysis computers to accommodate the new encryption protocol. The end result of a U.S. citizen's attempt to secure privacy through encryption on phone calls can have the opposite effect. 1. U.S. citizen can be targeted for no other reason than the use of strong encryption systems. Shutting down the NSA interceptions, legally. But, there is also a method by which U.S. citizens can frustrate this, which the various spy agencies get highly upset when utilized. First, the U.S. citizen needs to have an unexpired U.S. passport. This is vital. Second, they need to have a traditional telephone line installed into their homes, even if they do not use it. The phone line needs to be installed at the address they use on their U.S. passport. They need to receive mail at this address, to include several magazine and newspaper subscriptions. They need to have all of their utility bills delivered to this address. Third, they need to register to vote, using this same address, and ensure that they are maintained on the local voting rolls or citizen census. Fourth, they need to ensure they register with the Selective Service through this address, use this address for their driver's license and any other sort of government license, and get politically oriented junk mail at this address. It is also important to gain cable TV service to this address, under the name of the U.S. citizen, and of course to do the same with any sort of cell phone service, so that there is a huge number of what are called constitutional anchors whereby the U.S. citizen creates a multi-layered series of proofs that the location is in fact that of a U.S. citizen. To further strengthen these constitutional anchors, the phone at the location needs to be answered rather formally by politely announcing the location the caller has reached, and then announcing the name of the person who is answering the call. The caller on the other end then needs to state who they are, and where they are calling from so that to an eavesdrop there will be no question that both sides of the call are on U.S. 12. So as this legally sabotages the various forms of the reach around in terms of forcing a sort of block where the intercept, tapping, may still take place, but the actual audio of the call is not supposed to be permitted into NSA records. It does not actually stop eavesdropping, but rather complicates matters for the government if or when they do eavesdrop. In addition, ensure that your cell phone or data plans have your home address lists as the billing address, and ensure that your cell phone number is on one of the exchanges listed within 15-20 miles of your home, is a direction opposite that of your nearest larger city. Of course, you do not want the phone number to be any prefix or exchange within 30 miles of Washington, D.C. nor within a 50-mile radius of New York City, New York, or 30-mile radius of White Plains, New York. Decades of unlawful eavesdropping results in more careful wiretapping. After many decades of severe abuse by U.S. intelligence agencies unlawfully spying on U.S. citizens, President Reagan, in 1981, issued Executive Order 12,333. This executive order also had a classified addendum to it. While in the public document the President ordered U.S. government agencies to knock it off, the private, non-public classified addendum 2, allowed them to continue providing they were merely more careful. The more careful part still permitted wholesale eavesdropping. It authorized the storage of intercepted data until the end of time. It further required that when government agencies went sifting through the intercepted materials, they were supposed to ignore anything involving U.S. citizens. This was widely ignored. 3. A long history of presidents bugging their political opponents. The National Security Agency, NSA, was formed in 1952 during the Truman administration as a covert agency within the Department of Defense. Initially its personnel were largely Army personnel intermixed with CIA personnel. The NSA, members jokingly called it no such agency, was hidden from Congress. It was adroitly designed as an extension of the Armed Forces Security Agency formed in 1945, also under Truman. Even prior to 1945, going back to July 1917, during the Wilson administration, when Herbert O. Yardley became the head of the Cipher Bureau of Military Intelligence, MI8, he immediately targeted U.S. citizens and New York-based businesses, initiating eavesdropping against them through the Black Chamber. 4. The abundance of positive history of these agencies must be objectively combined with 13. The abundance of illegal eavesdropping against U.S. citizens for political purposes in which they also engaged. 5. During the Eisenhower administration, Eisenhower ordered to initiate a massive eavesdropping campaign on civil rights activists and leaders such as the relevant Martin Luther King. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was viewed as a tool of racial and religious oppression, also subject to government eavesdropping. 6. Under both the Johnson and Nixon administrations, the NSA was ordered to spy on the poor and poverty-stricken, mostly black, citizens of the United States to provide the president with leverage from which he could marginalize the poor blacks in terms of voting. This NSA program was not subtle. It was used to manipulate the respective presidential campaigns. 7. At the beginning of the Nixon administration, Nixon repurposed part of the NSA to spy on his political enemies and anyone else he felt might provide future political difficulties. Nixon went so far as eavesdropping on congressional members and justices of the Supreme Court using the NSA. Nixon, during his era, felt justified in having black, Jewish, and poor U.S. citizens bugged or wiretapped. 8. Let us not forget Tricky Dicky. The very grave constitutional violations by President Nixon were merely a side effect of identical abuses that went unchecked by Presidents Johnson, Eisenhower, Truman, and others. President Nixon pushed the envelope to an all-time pinnacle of misconduct. Nixon's conduct regarding electronic surveillance was so egregious that Congress stepped in during the Ford administration. As a response to the Nixon-era abuses, Congress formed the Church Commission to investigate serious misconduct by not only the FBI, but also the CIA and the NSA. All three had been used for eavesdropping and intelligence activities against blacks, Jews, communists, socialists, and Nixon's political enemies, real or simply perceived. The final report of the Church Committee dealt harshly with these agencies and their precedentially ordered, mostly through Nixon, criminal conduct. The committee finds that the domestic activities of the intelligence community at times violated specific statutory prohibitions and infringed the constitutional rights of American citizens. The legal questions involved in intelligence programs were often not considered. On other occasions, they 14. Were intentionally disregarded in the belief that because the program served the national security the law did not apply. While intelligence officers on occasion failed to disclose to their superiors programs which were illegal or of questionable legality, the committee finds that the most serious breaches of duty were those of senior officials, who were responsible for controlling intelligence activities and generally failed to assure compliance with the law. Many of the techniques used would be intolerable in a democratic society even if all of the targets had been involved in violent activity, but COINTELPRO went far beyond that. The Bureau conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association, on the theory that preventing the growth of dangerous groups and the propagation of dangerous ideas would protect the national security and deter violence. Supplementary detailed staff reports on intelligence activities and the rights of Americans. United States Senate. The Church Committee was initially formed to investigate the wrongdoing of the FBI during the Civil Rights era. Quickly, however, it found that the NSA and CIA were also working hand in glove with the FBI to target blacks, Jews, and the poverty-stricken. The only criteria required were being deemed by the president to be a political enemy. The Church Committee also found that President Kennedy had ordered wiretaps of congressional staff members, various members of the executive branch, congressmen, lobbyists, law firms, attorneys, and others strictly for political gain. The Church Committee found President Eisenhower ordered justices of the Supreme Court be wiretapped for Eisenhower's political gain. President Johnson ordered extensive espionage, which included wiretapping during the 1964 Democratic Convention in an active effort to manipulate the presidential campaign. The committee also found that Johnson illegally wiretapped the Republican Party in the Senate to ensure his presidential election in 1964. The Church Committee identified major constitutional breaches and unlawful wiretapping, burglaries, warrantless searches, and related prohibited actions by Presidents Roosevelt, 1933 to 1945, President Truman, 1945 to 1953, President Eisenhower, 1953 to 1091, President Kennedy, 1961 to 1963, President Johnson, 1963 to 1969, and of course President Nixon, 1969 to 1974. The Church Committee also stated, "Too many people have been spied upon by too many government agencies and too much information has been illegally collected. The government has often undertaken the secret surveillance of citizens on the basis of their political beliefs, even when those beliefs posed no threat of violence or illegal acts on behalf of a hostile foreign power. The government, operating 15. Primarily through secret and biased informants, but also using other intrusive techniques such as wiretaps, microphone bugs, surreptitious mail opening, and break-ins, has swept in vast amounts of information about the personal lives, views, and associations of American citizens. Investigations of groups deemed potentially dangerous, and even of groups suspected of associating with potentially dangerous organizations, have continued for decades, despite the fact that those groups did not engage in unlawful activity. Groups and individuals have been assaulted, repressed, harassed and disrupted because of their political views, social beliefs and their lifestyles. Investigations have been based upon vague standards whose breadth made excessive collection inevitable. Unsavory, harmful and vicious tactics have been employed, including anonymous attempts to break up marriages, disrupt meetings, ostracize persons from their professions, and provoke target groups into rivalries that might result in deaths. Intelligence agencies have served the political and personal objectives of presidents and other high officials. While the agencies often committed excesses in response to pressure from high officials in the executive branch and Congress, they also occasionally initiated improper activities and then concealed them from officials whom they had a duty to inform. Governmental officials, including those whose principal duty is to enforce the law, have violated or ignored the law over long periods of time and have advocated and defended their right to break the law. The constitutional system of checks and balances has not adequately controlled intelligence activities. Until recently, the executive branch has neither delineated the scope of permissible activities nor established procedures for supervising intelligence agencies. Congress has failed to exercise sufficient oversight, seldom questioning the use to which its appropriations were being put. Most domestic intelligence issues have not reached the courts, and in those cases when they have reached the courts, The judiciary has been reluctant to grapple with them. Intelligence Activities and the Rights of Americans Book 2, Final Report of the Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities, United States Senate, Church Committee. United States Senate. During the Ford and Carter administrations, there was illegal eavesdropping on U.S. citizens. The Church Committee's carnage is attributed for the much reduced scale of illegal eavesdropping by Ford and Carter. The eavesdropping, which did occur, became more sophisticated in that it was undertaken with much greater care with 16. An eye toward deniability. The NSA and CIA also set about to redefine themselves in order to avoid prior misconduct over the prior decades. 9. President Reagan essentially issued a body slam to all U.S. intelligence agencies by publicly forcing them to back off illegal surveillance of U.S. citizens. This public slam was tempered with his classified order addendum, which gave the intelligence agencies several loopholes from which to operate unencumbered. This was the landmark Executive Order 12333 and entitled United States Intelligence Activities. Unlawful wiretapping under FISA. In the world of espionage against U.S. citizens, tension exists between Reagan's Executive Order 12333 and a law called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act or FISA. When a federal agency wishes to avoid any inconvenience of obtaining a court order to eavesdrop, claims that the target is a foreign national, foreign agent of influence, or simply not a U.S. citizen, facilitates a secret and unbridled FISA warrant. Interestingly, the secret FISC/FISA court is located in the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse in Washington, D.C., but the actual judges are drawn from the federal district court judges across the country, and who essentially, and secretly, telecommute to the secret FISA court for a period of service. In this manner of rotating the judges, the FISC/FISA court keeps secret the names of the judges involved, so they can operate what is called a star chamber and evade oversight of their actions. Another current-day ploy by intelligence agencies to eavesdrop without obtaining any warrant is to perform their warrantless eavesdropping under the guise or the label of a training exercise in which they inadvertently stumbled upon the information intercepted. During the Bush, Sr. presidency from 1989 to 1993, a great deal of illicit eavesdropping against U.S. citizens existed. 10. It was restrained by comparison to present day due to a technical obstacle. Bush's obstacle was that online communications were growing faster than the government's ability to collect and store what it wanted. The prior focus on U.S. citizens decreased. This decrease, however, was due to the surge in foreign communications clogging up U.S. telecommunications. The reach-around time for valuable, intercepted information was painfully long. A solution, however, was about to take hold. The Clinton administration, 1993 to 2001, enacted a series of laws which required every company who made telecommunications equipment or provided 17. Communications services to build special backdoors that enabled the United States, state, and local government unsupervised access to communications systems and equipment. This legislatio.
That's the news. Join us here every day. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell. See you next time.
This is TBNN.